Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches, where we connect compassion with needs as we inspire growth with dignity. You'll find us in special places throughout the community. For those who remain hungry, we provide meals. For those who are challenged, we build wheelchair ramps. We comfort those who are ill, minister to those who are confined, and we remain an advocate for change and understanding on behalf of every element of our community. Connect and inspire. Encounter the Broome County Council of Churches.
Good morning and welcome to Encounter. I'm your host today, Joe Sellepack. I'm the Executive Director at the Broome County Council of Churches. As the Executive Director of the Council of Churches, I get to visit a lot of congregations throughout the throughout Broome County. And one of the things that's really interesting is when there's been a pastoral change, when one pastor has retired or moved on and a new pastor comes in. Each denomination has its own set of standards for determining who to call and how that call should happen. And it happens in some churches with great frequency and other churches without an awful lot of frequency at all. It's many years between callings of the various ministers. How is the UCC as a United Church of Christ as a denomination? How do they call a pastor?
Well, tends to be a fairly long and drawn-out process for both church as well as for the clergy who are seeking pastorates. Both the clergy candidate and the church develop a profile that is then channeled through the denominational office and made available to both clergy and church. It is up to the individual clergy member to seek a call to a particular congregation based on the advertisement that's on the website, and then submit their ministerial profile to that church's search committee. Here the congregation took years of searching, and my process by comparison wasn't nearly that long, but I submitted my profile and they flew me in for a couple in-person interviews and then for the candidacy sermon on May 1st of this year.
So my guest today is John Haack. John is the newly installed. The installation just happened, 2 weeks ago?
Right.
Yeah, 2 weeks ago at First Congregational Church at the corner of North and Main, or Front and Main. I'm sorry.
Front and Main.
Yeah. And so John, where did you come from before coming here to Binghamton?
Well, I was serving as pastor at Peace United Church of Christ in Elkader, Iowa, for 5.5 years before coming here. Before that, I pastored a church that I founded that is now UCC in Dallas, Texas for 19 years. So it's kind of been a roundabout way of eventually getting here, and I'm delighted to be here.
So the United Church of Christ is typically what they would call a congregational model.
It is.
So can you tell our audience, our listeners and our viewers, what that means and how it might differ from other models?
Sure. Well, United Church of Christ doesn't have bishops. It has conference ministers or general minister over the whole denomination. The congregation ultimately is in covenant with the denomination itself, and in that covenant, the congregation, each church, maintains its own autonomy in terms of calling a pastor or in setting church policies or determining what ministries it engages in. It's not dictated from the top.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's really what makes a congregational-based polity congregational, is that the congregation assumes a lot of the responsibility that the denomination in other traditions, like the United Methodist Church, is very much bishop-oriented kind of appointment system, where a minister is appointed to a congregation instead of the congregation. And congregations do have a bit of say in that process, but it sounds like there's a lot more congregational decision making that kind of goes on in the United Church of Christ than in the United Methodist Church.
I think that's a fair summation. You bet.
All right, very cool. And how you've obviously been in many different places. I would imagine that you've just basically skimmed the surface by saying Dallas and Iowa and Binghamton. How have you found like the local areas? How has that kind of impacted your ministry? Like, I would imagine that working in Dallas would be very different than working in Elkader, Iowa.
Very much so. In Dallas, it's a multicultural setting. Our congregation there had, on any given Sunday, 30% of its participants as people of color.
Right.
And the church at that time was located across the street from a school, a public school, and that had like 95% of its students eligible for the free lunch program.
Right.
So economic differences were big in that place. In Elkader, Iowa, it's a town of, I think the census says 1,250 people. It's the county seat. There's not a stoplight anywhere in the county.
Right.
And much of the ministry is dedicated not only to its members and the greater community, but also to agricultural farming traditions. So this ministry here is obviously going to take on a different format, and the diversity in the Binghamton area probably is closer to the diversity level in Dallas than it is to Elkader, Iowa.
Right.
The multitude of people isn't the same. The numbers in the population in Binghamton and the surrounding areas is probably closer to Davenport, Iowa, where I grew up.
All right. Yeah, when you think about how large Dallas is as a population center, I mean, you are talking millions of people.
Right.
Versus, I think the most recent census has the entire population of Broome County being around 150,000 people. So it is a microcosm of that. But yet, yeah, I do see where you're getting at. As far as like the percentage of folks who are from minorities versus white people, and then you end up with a lot of poverty. When you were talking about the amount of folks who are on the school lunch program in Dallas was around, you said 70?
Around 95%.
95%.
In that elementary school. In
that elementary school. There are elementary schools here which are very similar to that, but I think across the board it's right around 74-ish or 75% of the kids are on the free and reduced school lunch program, which makes it so that most of our schools in this area can give out, they don't ask for a card to show, whatever, and everyone gets a free lunch, regardless of whether they can pay for it or not.
And in Elkader, some got free lunches and some were paying for it, and then some monies became available that made it free for everyone for lunch.
Yeah.
The concern wasn't just about lunch, but also about weekends,
Right.
and summer times and that sort of thing. Haven't looked into yet how Binghamton and the surrounding areas are handling those kinds of concerns.
Yeah, so Binghamton is, they work with the Food Bank of the Southern Tier for the backpack program. So they do offer food for kids over the weekends. That way, my Rotary Club kind of participates in that too. That's another place where I should invite you at some point, is to Rotary. But we even at Chow and with the work that we do with Broome Bounty, we try to get meals to people throughout a weekend and have access to food so that they don't have to go hungry over the weekend, which
Sure.
is an important thing, even for kids who are living, when the school is out of session. We have to work doubly hard at points like that in order to make sure that kids get enough food. So you said that your congregation filled out a profile, and then you filled out a profile in order to come here. What was attractive to each other? I mean, I've often talked about the relationship between a pastor and a church. It's kind of like a marriage in a lot of ways.
It is.
And you have certain strengths that you bring to the table, and the congregation has certain expectations that they bring to the table, as well as certain strengths that they bring to the table as well, your expectations as well. So how did what were things that you found attractive and in that whole process?
I'm glad you asked that question, because I don't know that I could answer for the church and what made them interested in me. But this particular church has a history of providing outreach and ministry to the greater community, not just for the church itself, but a broader aspect to that. Example. Children's Peace Fair. It happened on the anniversary of Hiroshima.
Right.
The ice cream social, where we give away backpacks with school supplies in them. This Saturday, October 1st, I know this won't broadcast for time for that, but
right.
Is the flea market and clothing giveaway. By clothing, I mean winter coats and boots and things like that, that it's vitally important that people have, even if they can't afford to buy them.
Right.
And so the giveaway part of that comes into play. And I know our congregation is looking forward to that event happening tomorrow. But it's just that kind of history in the church, as well as it being on the forefront of some social justice issues, including the open and affirming status that the church has as a welcoming of people of any sexual orientation and LGBTQ. The acronym gets longer and longer as time unfolds, but you get the idea. And that feature of this church was an important one in my consideration.
And how have, it's interesting to me that ministers, they come from a variety of different families, and they bring a lot of strengths and a lot of different passions to the ministry. What are yours?
Racial justice issues and LGBT issues. Any kind of service that takes the congregation outside of its four walls,
right,
and out into the community to offer its services and support in a variety of ways. Those are important factors for me. The racial justice issue for me, probably, looking back on it, probably originated from my home church at Zion Lutheran in Davenport, Iowa, where the statue above the altar of Christ, with arms open like this, as in welcoming, was in a dark walnut. And the pastor of the church, after I had preached my first sermon at that church, asked me where I got my passion around social justice and racial issues. And I said, you can't stare at a statue of Jesus that's in dark walnut without having an idea that he was not blonde-haired and blue-eyed.
Right.
You know,
right.
So that's what I give credit for the origins of that passion.
My guest today is John Haack. He's the newly installed pastor at First Congregational Church in Binghamton. It's on the corner of Main Street and Front Street. I always love that the idea of a church at the corner of Front and Main. Two interesting terms that kind of come up in terms of where your congregation is located. And I've often thought, a congregation at the corner of Front and Main ought to be involved in public theology and public action, because it just makes sense, right?
We are in all aspects of that. I never thought about the street names, Front and Main. That's actually good. I like that insight. The church has a long history. My goodness, it was started in 1836 in the courthouse.
Right.
That's where it met. The site where we are now used to be Peterson's Tavern. Mm-hmm. There's a big plaque on the corner that says that. And if you go down into the catacombs of the church, you'll see even more evidence of that. But the church often is known as the Church of the Big Bell. Because there's this giant bell that's now out on the front lawn, and it's rung on multiple occasions, including every Sunday morning at the start of worship. But also it was rung, for example, at the Children's Peace Fair. Mm-hmm. And the bell used to be in the bell tower, and it was no small effort for the church to get it down to the front yard. I can imagine.
They had to probably get a crane for that, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it would have been a big job, because that bell tower is pretty high.
It is.
Yeah. So, how have you found Binghamton, having moved here from Elkader?
I've enjoyed it so far. Mm-hmm. Binghamton has all of the stores and restaurants that one could hope for. Somebody's going to take exception to that, because they'll say, "No, New York City has more." Well, of course, New York City has more, but compared to Elkader,
right?
Here you've got your choice of fast food restaurants. You've got multiple Dunkin' Donuts locations for coffee as well as donuts, and then there's some smaller non-chain kinds of businesses as well that I really believe from my experience in Elkader, Iowa, shop local as much as you can.
Yeah.
And we want to support those businesses as well in our community.
Yeah, our Chamber of Commerce actually does a big shop local kind of thing, and they talk about keeping the difference in how money stays in a community when you shop at like Kvarik's, for instance, hardware store, mm-hmm. in the north side, or in the first ward, and comparing that to shopping, at Lowe's or Home Depot. Not wanting to denigrate, because there's sometimes I have to go to Lowe's or to Home Depot in order to get the stuff I need for my house. But it's always good to be able to shop local in as much as you can, because it keeps money inside of the local area. So
it's true.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. as far as like what makes you tick? Like, what makes you get up in the morning and go, I belong in ministry? What is it that you find that makes you really passionate about the work that you do?
The good theological answer is the call of God.
It chose me.
Had to work that in there.
Yeah, you do. You do.
But no, that is something that really gets me up and going in the morning. And I'll take a look at my calendar to see what's going on for that day, as well as what's coming up in the week ahead. But it's important to me to have a purpose with which to rise and get about the day. And that purpose is doing ministry, witnessing for Jesus Christ in whatever way I can, giving support to other people of faith, of any faith or denomination, and encouraging their service to the community as well as to their church, synagogue, temple, whatever the case may be. At First Congregational Church, we welcome everyone, no matter where you are on life's journey. Right. You are welcome in our church, and so we want to emphasize that. An example of that is that there's a Roman Catholic group that uses an office space in our building. There's a Unity congregation that meets on Sundays after First Congregational's worship service is done. Then Unity meets, and we don't have to share the same beliefs or purposes to share space.
Right.
And be there for each other, supportive of one another in appropriate ways.
Now, you characterize the process that the congregation went through as being open and affirming. Can you flesh that out a little bit more for our listeners? What does it mean for a congregation to be open and affirming? It's not just saying homosexuality or any of the other hot topic, the LGBTQ, are okay. It's more than that. So can you help our
Sure.
Our
Well, I'll try. Open and affirming movement within the United Church of Christ has blossomed through many years. UCC was the first major denomination to ordain an openly gay man. And that leads to a comment in answer to your question, and that is that the open and affirming status of the church, of this church, means that there is no position, no leadership position, no ministry that your orientation would prevent you from doing. Obviously, we want to look at spiritual gifts and that sort of thing, and
right.
match people up with the ministries that they are equipped to do. But the orientation is not a part of the question on that.
Now, is that something that you have a personal investment in?
I do.
Yeah.
I do. Yeah. I was in development stages for ministry, going through college and seminary, and then discovered that I'm gay. And over the dinner table, Dad wasn't present at that meal.
Right.
My mom was, and my little brother, Jeff, who's passed away now but had Down syndrome, was seated at the table. And after the meal was over, I was seated in Dad's chair, which is unusual.
Right.
But I kind of spaced out after the meal, giving thought to a lot of things and letting my mind just whirl. And Mom asked what was wrong. And I said, well, let's wait until Jeff goes in the other room and then I'll tell you. And I came out to her. Her first question wasn't, what did we do wrong? Her first question is, what will that do to your career?
Oh, yeah.
And Mom and Dad, before their passing, were very supportive and helpful, and even welcomed when I brought someone home to meet them. So I've got to say the love, unconditional love, was there from them.
Yeah.
It was quite a shift in some of their thinking, Moms and Dads both, from what they grew up with or what they were taught in the churches of their background.
Yeah, it's been when I start thinking about the plight of gay people within congregations, I think oftentimes it's viewed as being from an ideological perspective, and we don't often think about it from the perspective of someone who was raised in the church, or someone who's going through ordination, or what it's like to be marginalized because of just how I was created, right?
Right. And when I came out, then the bishop in the Lutheran church said, well, you can't. I can't recommend you for a call in any of the churches. He's since passed away, but he later on wrote a letter of apology to me for his position that he felt like he had to take as bishop. He suggested I find another church in which to worship, and I had already begun attending the Metropolitan Community Church locally.
Right.
MCC, as a denomination, was founded in 1968 by Reverend Elder Troy Perry, and horror stories have been told of gay and lesbian, transgender people being called up before the church and publicly condemned during worship services in their churches of their upbringing. If they stayed there, then they put up with that condemnation and all that it did to their mental and spiritual state. But many of them left the church of their upbringing and were concerned that they might even choose to leave Christianity as a whole.
My guest today has been John Haack, and we've been talking about his call to ministry and how he came to Binghamton, to First Congregational Church. Thank you for being on Encounter today, and I'd like to have you back on at some point. We can talk a little bit more about the open and affirming and the position of gay folks within congregations. But thank you for being on today and for sharing your passion for ministry and the work that is going on at First Congregational Church.
Thank you very much.
And to all of our viewers and listeners, I hope that you have a great day. Be kind and gentle to each other.